I did not expect to survive long enough to confess this. The record you're hearing was never meant to exist, scratched into memory by frost, blood, and guilt. In the winter of 1707, our regiment was ordered beyond the mapped world, into a valley the locals refused to name. They spoke of an old king beneath the ice, a beast older than scripture. We laughed then. Soldiers always do. But I saw it breathe steam into the snow. I heard muskets fail like children's toys. What hunted us was not a myth, yet no chronicle dares write it down. This is my account, before the cold finally claims it too. Welcome to Combat Lore Files, where the shadows of war live on. Hit subscribe and get nightly drops of stories like this. There are places a soldier is never meant to march, not because the enemy waits there, but because the land itself does. I still remember the weight of that order in my hands. It was sealed twice, thick red wax cracked by the cold, marked with a crest I had never seen before. We were told not to read it aloud, not in the barracks, not by the fire, not even in whispers between men who had shared lice, bread, and blood. In the winter of 1707, secrecy had become another form of discipline. I was infantry, nothing more. A musket, a bayonet, and boots already splitting at the seams. When the captain finally spoke, his voice was flat, stripped of ceremony. We were to march east of the mapped territories, beyond the last surveyed ridgeline, to secure a rumored passage through a frozen valley. A shortcut, they said. A strategic corridor through ice and stone that could move regiments faster than any road. There was a war pressing from all sides then, borders bleeding into one another, and command was desperate for advantage. No one asked why the maps ended there. We never did. The march began before dawn. Snow swallowed sound the way water swallows breath. Our boots sank deep with each step, the crunch muted, as if the earth itself was listening and did not want to be heard. Frost clung to our coats, stitched into the wool like white rot. The wind cut through leather and bone alike, carrying with it a smell I could not name then. Sharp, old, like iron left too long in the open. We followed a guide from the border villages, a man with a beard grayed not by age but by weather. He would not meet our eyes. Every few miles he muttered words under his breath, prayers or curses I could not tell. When one of us laughed and asked if the mountains frightened him, the man stopped walking. He turned slowly, his eyes hollow as frozen wells, and said only, "The mountains are not what I fear." Then he kept moving. As the hours dragged on, the land grew wrong. Trees thinned, then vanished altogether, leaving behind a wide basin of snow and stone. The valley opened before us like a wound, its slopes steep and smooth, carved by something far older than war. No banners marked it, no ruins, no roads. It was a place untouched by empire or crown. The silence there pressed against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and uneven. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, slipping low along the ground as if unwilling to rise too high. Men stopped speaking. Jokes died mid-breath. You could feel morale draining not from hunger or cold, but from something harder to explain, a sense that we had stepped somewhere uninvited. Supplies were already running thin. Hardtack had turned brittle as glass. Powder horns were kept close to the body so the charge would not freeze useless. Fingers stiffened around musket stocks, numb despite wool gloves. I remember thinking that if we were ambushed, half of us would not even feel the trigger. The captain pushed us forward regardless. Orders were orders, and fear was something you swallowed like bad meat and prayed it would not kill you. We made camp near the center of the valley, though no one liked the idea. Fires were kept low, barely breathing, more smoke than flame. Shadows stretched long across the snow, bending in ways that made the eye ache. I was on watch when I first noticed it, the way sound behaved. A cough did not echo. A dropped canteen made no ring. Even footsteps seemed to vanish a few paces away, as if the valley absorbed noise the way snow absorbs blood. Somewhere far off, ice cracked, slow and deep, like a joint being forced the wrong way. It did not sound natural. It sounded deliberate. That night, sleep came in fragments. I dreamed of marching, always marching. But the ground beneath my feet was warm, slick, pulsing. I woke with my heart racing and my mouth full of copper. Around me, other men stirred, some whispering prayers, others staring wide-eyed into the dark. No one laughed anymore. Even the officers looked diminished, their authority shrunk by the sheer emptiness around us. When dawn finally crept over the ridgeline, pale and weak, it revealed what the darkness had hidden. Not far from the camp, half buried in drifted snow, lay bones. At first I thought them animal remains, elk perhaps, or bear. Then I saw the curve of a rib too thick, too long. A skull split cleanly in two, teeth like broken knives frozen in a final scream. Nearby were scraps of leather, rotted straps, a rusted buckle that might once have belonged to a man. No marker, no grave, just remains abandoned to the cold. The guide refused to go closer. He crossed himself again and again, whispering faster now. The captain ordered the bones cleared, recorded, dismissed as the casualties of old hunting parties or lost travelers. But none of us believed that. Not really. Because whatever had left those bones behind had not scattered them like wolves do. They were piled, arranged, as if placed with purpose. I stood there, staring at the remains, and felt the unmistakable sensation of being observed. Not from the ridges, not from the sky, but from the valley itself, as though the ground beneath the snow was aware of our presence, measuring us. We had marched beyond the edge of the map, beyond reason, into a place that had no intention of letting us pass unchanged. We believed the valley was empty, but the bones half buried in the snow told a different story. Some warnings are not shouted because they are meant to be heard by those who already know the truth. We reached the settlement by accident, or so the officers claimed. A cluster of low stone huts emerged from the white like exposed ribs, half swallowed by snowdrifts that had hardened into ice. Smoke rose thinly from holes in the roofs, barely visible against the gray sky. No road led to it, no marker on any map we carried. If the valley felt unclaimed, this place felt forgotten. The villagers did not greet us. They watched from doorways and behind walls, faces wrapped in furs, eyes reflecting something between fear and resignation. Children were nowhere to be seen. Even dogs did not bark. The silence followed us right into the heart of the settlement, clinging tighter than the cold. The captain ordered a halt. We needed food, fresh water, and directions. Our guide refused to step further. He muttered that this was as far as he would go, that the valley had already taken enough. An officer threatened him with a blade, but the man did not flinch. He simply pointed toward the huts and said, "They will tell you what I cannot." Inside the largest dwelling, we met the elders. They were not dressed like soldiers or peasants, but like survivors. Layers of hide and cloth stitched and restitched, faces lined deep by wind and years. They spoke little, and when they did, it was in a dialect thick with pauses, as if words themselves carried weight. They asked why we had come. The captain gave them the lie prepared for such moments. Lost patrol, seeking shelter, passing through. One of the elders laughed softly, a sound like ice cracking underfoot. "No one passes through," he said. "They either turn back or they stay forever." It was the herdsman who finally spoke. He was older than the others, his back bent as though pressed down by something invisible. His eyes never left the fire in the center of the room. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but the room leaned toward him. He told us the valley had no name because names give things permission to be remembered. Long before borders, before crowns and uniforms, something had lived there. Not born of the land, but claimed by it. Entombed by winters so old even the mountains had forgotten them. He spoke of footsteps that shook the snow loose from cliffs, of nights when the ground trembled as if struck by distant cannon. He called it a god of teeth, a king of hunger, bound beneath ice by time and cold. The officers exchanged glances. One of them scoffed openly, calling it pagan nonsense, a tale meant to frighten children into obedience. The captain nodded, thanked the elders politely, and ordered extra rations distributed as payment for shelter. But I watched the herdsman's hands as he spoke. They trembled not with age, but with memory. He was not telling a story. He was recalling a warning passed down like a scar. As we prepared to leave, the herdsman caught my sleeve. His grip was surprisingly strong. He leaned close, breath smelling of smoke and dried meat, and whispered words meant only for me. "When the ice breathes," he said, "do not stand your ground. Ground remembers footsteps." I did not understand then, but the fear in his eyes stayed with me longer than any order. We marched out before dusk, the settlement disappearing behind us as quickly as it had appeared. No one waved, no one followed. It was as if the villagers were relieved to see us go, as though our presence had stirred something they had worked hard to keep sleeping. The valley closed around us again, wider now, emptier, the snow unbroken except for our own tracks. The officers laughed about superstition, about how fear grows best in isolation. But their laughter was forced, brittle. Even they had felt it, the wrongness, the sense of pressure, like standing too close to deep water. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. The wind rose, screaming down the slopes with sudden violence, rattling armor and tearing at cloaks. It sounded like distant artillery rolling across frozen hills. We made camp quickly, this time closer together, fires guarded by men with loaded muskets. I took watch again, staring out into the darkness, replaying the herdsman's words. Somewhere beneath the howling wind, I thought I heard another sound, lower, deeper, not carried by air but by earth. A vibration felt through the soles of my boots, slow and rhythmic, like something massive shifting its weight far away. That night, as the wind howled like artillery, something else howled back. Tracks tell stories long before survivors do, and some stories are too large to belong to any living animal. The morning after the wind screamed itself hoarse, we woke to a valley that felt altered. Not visibly different, but wrong in a way the body understands before the mind does. Snow had fallen again during the night, fresh and unmarked, erasing our footprints as if the land wished to forget we had ever been there. Breath hung heavy in the air, each exhale sharp enough to sting the lungs. Orders were given quietly now, voices low, clipped, stripped of bravado. The captain sent patrols in pairs along the valley floor, instructed to scout ahead for the rumored passage while the rest broke camp. I was assigned to the forward sweep, musket slung tight, fingers numb around the stock. We moved slowly, senses stretched thin, listening for anything that did not belong. As we advanced, the snow began to change. It was not smooth anymore. Long depressions cut through it in uneven lines. Not tracks exactly, more like scars pressed deep and frozen hard. I crouched beside one and ran a gloved hand along its edge. The snow was compacted down to ice beneath, crushed with immense force. No claw marks, no drag, just weight, enormous weight. My patrol partner muttered that perhaps an avalanche had passed through, but even he did not sound convinced. Avalanches scatter. This was deliberate, directional, as though something had moved through the valley with intent. Further on, we found trees snapped clean through, trunks thicker than a man's chest, broken as if they were kindling. The splinters pointed inward, toward the valley's center, not outward as they would from a fall. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Wolves did not do this. Bears did not do this. Even siege engines would have struggled. When we signaled back to camp, the officers came to see for themselves. No one joked then. The captain knelt, silent, staring at the damage with a furrowed brow. He ordered the men closer together, formation tightened, powder checked twice. We lost our first sentry before noon. A young boy, barely old enough to shave, posted near a rise overlooking the valley mouth. One moment he was there, stamping his feet against the cold. The next he was gone. No cry, no shot, just absence. We found his musket lying in the snow, barrel bent slightly, as if struck against stone. Beyond it, drag marks led away, deep grooves carved into the ice, vanishing into a bank of fog rolling low along the ground. The fog did not move like weather. It clung, pooled, crept forward inch by inch. The guide refused to approach it. He fell to his knees instead, pressing his forehead to the snow, whispering frantically. The officers argued. Some called it desertion. Others spoke of wolves emboldened by hunger. But no blood stained the snow, no scattered gear. Whatever had taken the boy had done so cleanly, effortlessly, as if lifting a sack of grain. I stood there staring at the fog, my heart hammering, convinced that if it parted even slightly, something would look back at us. It did not. It simply waited. We pressed on because stopping felt worse than moving. The valley narrowed slightly ahead, the slopes drawing closer, the air growing heavier. Sound behaved strangely there. Voices carried too far, then not at all. A shouted order would echo once, twice, then die abruptly, cut short like a throat. My ears rang constantly, a dull pressure building behind the eyes. Every instinct screamed that we were prey walking deeper into a hunting ground. Yet discipline, drilled into bone and muscle, forced our legs forward. Around mid-afternoon, we found the carcass. It lay half-buried near a frozen stream, massive ribs protruding from the snow like the beams of a collapsed hall. At first glance, it looked ancient, stripped clean by time. Then I saw the flesh, frozen solid, torn open, edges jagged, not gnawed. The skull alone was larger than a horse's chest, jaw lined with teeth longer than bayonets, cracked and shattered as if something even stronger had crushed it. The smell hit us next, a deep, sour stench trapped beneath the cold, released only where the ice had split. Men retched. One crossed himself repeatedly, lips moving without sound. This was no creature any of us recognized. It did not belong to the world we knew, nor to any natural order we had been taught. The herdsman's words returned to me unbidden. A god of teeth. I realized then that this carcass was not the warning. It was evidence of something worse. Whatever had killed this thing was still alive. The captain ordered sketches made, notes taken, as if documentation could protect us. But his hands shook as he spoke. Even authority bends when faced with the impossible. The light began to fade early, clouds swallowing what little sun the valley offered. Shadows lengthened, stretching across the snow, pooling thick and dark between rocks. The fog returned, rolling in from both ends of the valley now, closing us in. I heard it then. Not a howl, not yet, but a sound like distant thunder felt more than heard. The ground vibrated faintly beneath my boots, rhythmic and slow. Each pulse sent a tremor up my legs into my chest. Men froze, eyes wide, breath held. The vibration stopped. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Somewhere ahead, ice cracked sharply, followed by a low, wet sound, like breath forced through a massive chest. We stood there, armed and trained and utterly unprepared, staring into the deepening fog. Whatever hunted this valley was no longer sleeping, and we had already stepped too far inside its territory to turn back. The moment the ground exhales, you understand that the world beneath your feet has been awake far longer than you have. The first rupture came without warning. No tremor, no gradual cracking, just a sudden violent split in the frozen earth ahead of us, sharp enough to make every man flinch. Snow collapsed inward, sliding into a widening seam that cut across the valley floor like a fresh wound. Cold air rushed upward from below, carrying a stench so ancient and heavy it felt thick on the tongue, a mix of rot, iron, and something animal that had never learned fear. I remember thinking the valley was breathing, drawing us closer with that sound, as if the land itself had lungs buried under centuries of ice. Orders swallowed them whole. Muskets were raised in every direction, bayonets trembling at the ends of barrels. The fog recoiled slightly from the lit in the ground, curling away as if even it did not wish to linger there. Then came the sound, deep, resonant, and impossibly loud. Not a roar at first, but a guttural rumble that rolled up from beneath the ice, vibrating through bone and marrow alike. It felt less like hearing and more like being struck from the inside. The ice heaved upward. Chunks the size of wagons burst free and toppled aside, shattering on impact. From the opening rose a shape too large for the mind to accept all at once. Dark hide, scarred and ridged, pushed through the snow, followed by a massive skull crowned with rows of teeth that glistened wetly in the pale light. Steam poured from its mouth and nostrils, billowing into the air in thick clouds, each breath a visible declaration of life where none should exist. It dragged itself free with a strength that mocked every siege engine I had ever seen, talons carving trenches into the ice as it rose to its full, terrible height. Men screamed. Some fired immediately, powder flashing uselessly as musket balls sparked against its hide and fell away like pebbles. Others stood frozen, unable to reconcile training with what stood before us. The creature's head turned slowly, eyes locking onto our formation with a focus that made my blood run cold. There was intelligence there, not human, not thoughtful, but purposeful, predatory. It roared then, a sound that tore through the valley like cannon fire, echoing back again and again until it felt as though the mountains themselves were answering it. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I fired, reloaded with shaking hands, fired again. The recoil bruised my shoulder, the smoke burned my eyes, but I never looked away. Shots landed, some drawing dark blood that steamed where it struck the snow. The creature recoiled slightly, more surprised than hurt, then surged forward. It moved faster than anything that large should have been able to move, each step shaking the ground, each swing of its head scattering men like broken toys. The line collapsed, discipline shattered under raw terror. Soldiers ran, slipping and falling, screaming as talons closed around them or jaws snapped shut with a wet, final sound. I saw one officer crushed beneath a single footstep, his armor folding inward as if made of tin. Another was lifted screaming into the air, his voice cut short in a spray of red that stained the snow black. The smell of gunpowder mixed with blood and that ancient stench, creating a haze that burned the lungs and blurred vision. I stumbled backward, heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The creature turned toward me, its massive head lowering, one eye fixing on my position. Time slowed. I saw every detail, the frost clinging to its scales, the scars etched deep into its hide, the way its breath rolled out in heavy plumes. In that moment I understood the herdsman's fear, the elder's silence, the reason the valley had no name. This was not a beast that belonged to stories. Stories belonged to it. A cannon fired from behind me, the blast deafening at close range. The shot struck the creature's shoulder, tearing away flesh and sending it reeling with a bellow of rage. That momentary distraction saved my life. Hands grabbed me, dragging me backward as officers screamed for a retreat. We ran, not in formation, not with honor, but with the desperate instinct of animals fleeing a larger predator. The creature pursued, not frantically but with a terrible patience. It chose targets deliberately, cutting off escape routes, forcing us toward narrower ground. Every few seconds the earth shuddered beneath its weight. Snow fell from the slopes in heavy sheets, triggered by the vibrations, burying bodies and equipment alike. The fog thickened, swirling around us as if summoned by the chaos. We did not stop until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. When we finally dared to look back, the creature stood silhouetted against the broken ice, head raised, roaring into the sky as if claiming the valley anew. Then, slowly, it turned and vanished into the fog, its footsteps fading but never fully disappearing. That was the moment I knew this was no skirmish, no accident of war. We had awakened something entombed by time, and it would not return to sleep quietly. We ran, but the valley had already chosen its prey. Fear does not arrive all at once in battle. It seeps in, dissolving discipline piece by piece until nothing solid remains. We ran until the concept of direction lost meaning. The valley twisted in on itself, slopes narrowing, fog thickening, the ground uneven beneath boots that no longer marched but stumbled. Orders were still being shouted, but they no longer carried authority. Voices cracked, overlapped, vanished into the cold. Training failed us because training assumes an enemy that obeys the same rules of fear and injury as men. Whatever hunted us did not. My chest burned, every breath tearing through lungs already scraped raw by powder smoke and frozen air. When we finally slowed, it was not because we chose to, but because exhaustion forced us to stop. Men collapsed into the snow, retching, sobbing, praying aloud without shame. We attempted to regroup near a narrow ravine where rock walls rose sharply on either side. It felt defensible, or at least less open than the valley floor. The captain was still alive, his face pale, eyes darting constantly toward the fog. He tried to count us. The numbers made no sense. Too many were missing, too many voices gone. We stacked what ammunition we had left, realizing with growing horror how little remained. Powder damp from snow, flints cracked, hands too numb to reload quickly. The reality settled in quietly but completely. If the creature returned, we would not survive another encounter. Faith fractured next. I watched hardened soldiers argue over prayers, some invoking God loudly, others cursing him for abandoning us. One man laughed hysterically, insisting it was all a dream brought on by cold and hunger, even as blood froze in his beard from a wound he had not noticed. Another tried to desert outright, scrambling up the ravine wall until loose stone gave way and he fell, breaking his neck with a sound like snapped wood. No one moved to retrieve the body. We had begun to understand that stopping meant dying. The sound returned not long after. A low vibration felt through the rock itself. Slow, deliberate. Each step announced its presence without urgency, as if it knew there was nowhere for us to go. The creature did not need to see us to track us. The ground betrayed us, carrying the memory of our movement straight to it. Men pressed themselves against the stone, as if flattening their bodies could erase them. I felt the rock beneath my gloves trembling faintly, as though sharing our fear. The first attack in the ravine was swift. The creature lunged into the narrow space, jaws snapping shut on two men at once, lifting them screaming before hurling their bodies aside like refuse. Muskets fired at near point-blank range, the blasts deafening in the confined space. This time, shots struck true. Blood sprayed hot against the cold air, steam rising where it hit the snow. The creature recoiled, roaring in fury, its tail smashing against the rock walls, sending shards raining down. It could be hurt. That knowledge spread through us like fire. Not hope exactly, but resolve. We fought then, not with strategy, but with desperation sharpened into action. Bayonets stabbed into exposed flesh when it surged too close. Powder was dumped directly into wounds and ignited, creating bursts of flame and smoke that made it bellow in pain. Still, every strike cost us dearly. Each moment it remained meant another man lost. I slipped on blood-slick stone and nearly fell beneath its shadow, saved only by a hand dragging me back as jaws snapped inches from my legs. The creature withdrew suddenly, retreating from the ravine with an enraged roar that echoed long after it disappeared. Silence followed, broken only by ragged breathing and the whimpers of the wounded. We had survived, but survival felt temporary, borrowed. The captain slumped against the rock, his authority spent. He looked older than any man had a right to look. In that moment, command passed not through rank, but through necessity. We spoke quietly, urgently, planning not how to win, but how to delay the inevitable long enough to make it hurt. The realization settled heavily among us. This valley was not meant to be crossed. It was meant to contain, and by entering it, we had become part of what it was designed to feed. We understood then that if we were to live, it would not be by running, but by forcing the hunt to end on our terms. Only when cornered did we realize this creature could bleed. There comes a moment when retreat ends, not because courage appears, but because the world leaves you no room to step back. The plan formed without ceremony, born from what little reason fear had not stripped from us. The ravine narrowed ahead, its walls rising sheer and jagged, ice glazing the stone like a shell. If there was any place in that valley where size could be turned into weakness, it was there. We had powder left, not much, and a handful of iron tools meant for camp work rather than war. We had bodies, too. Dead men whose packs still held cartridges, whose coats could be stripped for wadding, whose courage we borrowed without asking. No prayers were spoken aloud this time. Even God felt distant, perhaps unwilling to witness what we were about to do. We worked quickly, hands bleeding where gloves tore, fingers numb to pain. Powder was packed into crevices along the ravine wall, tamped down with stone and wrapped in cloth. We carved shallow channels in the ice, guiding where meltwater would run once fire touched it. The idea was simple and terrible. Weaken the ground, blind the beast with smoke and flame, then bring the ravine down on top of it. It was not a plan meant for survival. It was a plan meant for ending something that should never have been awakened. As dusk bled into night, the valley grew restless. The fog thickened, curling low, hugging the ground as if trying to hide us. The vibration returned, closer now, each step a measured promise. Men took positions along the walls, muskets loaded, bayonets fixed, faces pale but steady. I pressed myself into a niche in the rock, heart pounding so loudly I feared it would betray me. The sound of those footsteps filled every space, leaving no room for thought. Then it appeared at the mouth of the ravine, a looming silhouette against the dim light. Its eyes reflected firelight as it advanced, head low, jaws opening and closing as if tasting the air. It knew. Not the details perhaps, but the intent. The creature paused, sniffed, then roared, a challenge that shook ice loose from above. Men fired in unison. Smoke erupted, shots striking flesh, drawing blood that steamed as it spilled. It charged. The world collapsed into noise and motion. I lit the fuse beside me and threw myself flat as the first explosion tore through the ravine wall. Stone and ice burst outward, slamming into the creature's flank. It screamed, a sound so violent it felt like it scraped the inside of my skull. Another charge went off, then another, each blast weakening the walls, filling the air with choking smoke and falling debris. The beast thrashed, jaws snapping blindly, tail smashing rock and men alike. One soldier was crushed against the wall beside me, his body folding with a wet crack. I did not look away this time. There was no room left for turning from horror. I found myself face to face with it then, separated by only a few paces and a curtain of smoke. One massive eye fixed on me, bloodshot, burning with fury and something else. Recognition, perhaps. In that instant, the world narrowed to that gaze. I saw scars that told of battles long before us, long before steel or gunpowder. This thing had survived ages, and now it was here, bleeding, enraged, cornered. I drove my bayonet into exposed flesh as it lunged, the impact jarring my arm to the shoulder. It recoiled, bellowing, and I was thrown backward by the force of its movement. Another explosion rocked the ravine. The ground gave way with a sound like the world breaking. Ice and stone collapsed inward, burying legs, tail, then torso. The creature roared one final time. The sound cut short as the ravine caved in completely, sealing it beneath tons of frozen earth. Silence followed, sudden and absolute. No vibration, no breath. Only the settling crackle of ice and the hiss of cooling stone. We lay there stunned, half buried ourselves, unsure whether the end had come or merely paused. Slowly, painfully, we rose. Of those who had stood with us, fewer than half remained. The ravine was gone, replaced by a jagged mound of debris, already frosting over as if the valley were eager to hide what had happened. We waited for movement that never came. Relief did not arrive, only exhaustion, heavy and hollow. We had not won a battle. We had closed a wound that should never have been opened. And deep down, we all knew this burial was temporary, held together by cold and chance. The silence afterward was worse than the roar. Some victories feel heavier than defeat, because you know they will never be spoken of honestly. The night after the ravine collapse did not feel like survival. It felt like an aftershock that refused to end. We did not cheer. We did not speak of triumph. We simply sat among the broken stones and frozen blood, staring at the mound that sealed the creature beneath it. Snow began to fall again, light at first, then thicker, as if the valley itself was already erasing the evidence. The men who remained moved like ghosts, hollow-eyed, wrapped in coats taken from the dead. Every sound made us flinch. Every shift of ice felt like the ground reconsidering its decision to stay still. By morning, command reasserted itself, not through strength, but through fear of chaos. The captain ordered the site marked on our maps, not with words, but with a blank space. No symbol, no note, just absence. We were instructed to gather what remained of our supplies and prepare to leave the valley by the fastest route possible. There would be no recovery of bodies, no prayers spoken aloud, no records kept beyond what could be explained as an avalanche or a failed expedition. Men nodded and obeyed, because the alternative was acknowledging what we had truly encountered. We began the march out with fewer than half our original number. The valley felt different now, quiet in a way that was not merely silent, but restrained. The fog thinned, the wind softened, yet the sense of being watched never fully disappeared. It felt less like a hunter stalking us and more like a warden observing prisoners being released on condition of silence. I kept expecting the ground to tremble again, for the ice to crack open beneath our feet. It did not. But the absence of movement was no comfort. It was like walking away from a grave you were not sure was deep enough. As we climbed toward the ridgeline, the guide finally spoke again. He did not ask what we had seen. He did not need to. He only said the valley would sleep now, perhaps for another age, perhaps not. He warned us that cold preserves more than flesh. It preserves memory. I understood then that the land itself would remember what we had done, long after names and nations changed. That thought stayed with me far longer than the image of the beast itself. When we reached familiar territory, when trees returned and the air lost that ancient stench, relief should have come. Instead, guilt followed us like a shadow. At the nearest outpost, officers rewrote reports. Missing men became casualties of exposure. The detour through the valley was omitted entirely. Sketches were burned, notes destroyed. The captain's orders were clear and absolute. What happened there would not be spoken of again. Not to superiors, not to family, not even among ourselves. We were soldiers. We obeyed. But silence has a cost. I saw it in the men who survived. Nightmares plagued us, shared in fragments, dreams of breathing ice, of footsteps that shook the earth, of eyes opening beneath the snow. Some took to drink, others to prayer. A few deserted at the first opportunity, unable to stand beneath open sky without looking down. One man put a pistol in his mouth a week later and ended his own war. The official record called it madness brought on by cold. I knew better. We all did. Years passed. Campaigns shifted. Borders were redrawn. I survived battles that should have killed me, yet none of them haunted me like that valley. From time to time, rumors reached us. Villages further east abandoned, herds vanishing, tremors felt beneath frozen ground. Each time the reports were dismissed or buried, just as ours had been. I began to understand then that what we had done was not an end, but a postponement. We had pushed something back under the ice and convinced ourselves that was enough. Now, as I write this, older and slower, I realize survival is not the same as escape. The valley remains, unnamed, unmarked, waiting beneath snow that falls year after year. Men will forget, maps will change, but the cold does not forget, and neither do those of us who walked out carrying a truth too heavy for any official record. We left the valley behind, but it did not let us go. History forgets what it cannot explain, but the land remembers everything. I did not speak of the valley for many years, not because I feared punishment, but because language failed me. How do you explain a truth that sounds like madness even to your own ears? Wars continued, kings died, flags changed color. I aged in increments marked by scars and funerals, yet that winter of 1707 never loosened its grip on me. It lived quietly behind my eyes, resurfacing whenever frost crept into my bones or the ground trembled faintly beneath marching feet. I came to understand that some battles do not end when the fighting stops. They end only when memory itself grows too weak to carry them. I returned once, decades later, not as a soldier, but as a man nearing the end of his strength. Curiosity, guilt, or perhaps something closer to obligation pulled me back toward those mountains. The maps had changed, yet the valley remained unmarked, a pale scar between ridgelines. Locals spoke of it still, though the story had shifted with time. They called it a cursed hollow now, a place where animals would not graze and snow fell deeper than anywhere else. Children were warned that the ground there could wake if angered, that something with many teeth slept beneath the ice, dreaming of footsteps. They laughed when they told it, the way people laugh at stories meant to frighten them into obedience. But laughter does not erase belief, it merely disguises it. I stood at the edge and felt it again, that pressure, that awareness. The valley looked peaceful, almost beautiful, blanketed in white beneath a clear sky. No sign remained of the ravine or the battle. Time and cold had done their work well. If I had not been there, if I had not felt the earth breathe and heard that roar, I might have believed the lie we wrote into history. That nothing unusual had happened, that men simply vanished, as they often do in war. But I knew better, and I knew that the truth did not need witnesses to persist. Legends, I learned, are not born from exaggeration. They are born from silence. When truth is buried deep enough, it does not disappear, it transforms. It becomes myth, then folklore, then a warning whispered so often it loses its original shape. The elders we ignored had understood this. They did not name the valley because naming is an invitation. We arrived with maps and orders and arrogance, believing the world existed to be crossed, claimed, and corrected. The valley taught us otherwise. It reminded us that war is not always the greatest violence a place can witness. That lesson followed me long after my uniform wore thin. I saw it in later campaigns, when armies marched into jungles, deserts, and mountains they did not understand, dismissing local fears as superstition. Each time, the land took its due: disease, exposure, unseen enemies. History recorded the losses as strategy or miscalculation. Rarely did it acknowledge hubris. Rarely did it admit that some places are not empty simply because they are quiet. I often think of the creature beneath the ice. Whether it truly died there or merely returned to a deeper sleep, I cannot say. Perhaps it was a relic of an older world, trapped by climate and chance, awakened briefly by the violence of men. Perhaps it was something else entirely, something that does not fit neatly into any age. What matters is not its name or nature, but what it represented. Proof that the world is larger, older, and far less tame than we pretend it is. That winter taught me the true shape of fear. Not the sharp terror of battle, but the slow realization that we are guests on this earth, not its masters. War convinces men they can bend reality through force. Legends exist to remind us how wrong that belief can be. When soldiers vanish and maps fall silent, stories step in to carry what records refuse to hold. So if you hear of a frozen valley no one claims, where snow settles too evenly and the ground feels alive beneath your boots, understand this: you are not hearing a fairy tale. You are hearing the echo of men who marched past the edge of the map and paid the price for believing nothing waited there. And that is how legends are born in the cold. This story is inspired by real wartime reports, blended with folklore, and dramatized for narrative purposes.